It's high noon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode number 5 of Foul Play. That's Fantasy Overwatch League Play, brought to you by High Noon Productions. As always, I am your host, DeathBlow, for this particular show, and joined, as always, by Asmith. How you doing today, buddy?
Man, I am so happy today.
It was a phenomenal weekend of
Crazy.
Overwatch. No matter who you rooted for, I think everybody, well, maybe not absolutely everybody, had something to root for, but either way, if you're a fan of the league on the overall, it was just a phenomenal weekend. Big performances from a lot of different teams. We saw the stage playoffs go on. We saw all sorts of things, as well as we got a solid look at just kind of what the standings are. We're finally here, right? The Mercy meta is dead. No more Moth.
Mercy's dead into the ground, right?
The wings have been clipped on that Moth in particular, and we are now ready to move forward. And we got a little bit of a break here, so things are going to be a little different this week. For example, we don't have to look forward at anything. We're going to have another episode before you guys have to set your lineups again. So this is going to be a stage 1 in review style episode. We're going to be looking strictly backwards. Updating you on all of our expert leagues, taking a look at leaders and feeders for this week, week 5, as well as the stage on the overall. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion here about what's going to change in the next stage. Who do we expect to benefit? Who do we expect to be hurt by the upcoming balance changes? Maybe the new map pool, no limitation on the factors, but spoiler alert, we didn't really factor the map pool in too much into our decisions there. But nonetheless, one thing we do want to talk about quickly, Asmith, I know you have strong opinion on this topic in particular, and it's something that will be better going forward, but nonetheless, it was a bit of a blow for fantasy leagues this week. Winston's Lab included the playoffs into this stage, into this week's matchups. So, as we all know, spoiler alerts, if you're not caught up on VOD, stop or wait, just fast forward a little bit. I don't know, you probably shouldn't be listening to this show if you're worried about spoilers. Just stop right now and go watch the playoffs. But we have, obviously, the London Spitfire played in not 1, not 2, like everybody else, but they played in 4 matches this week.
4 matches? Are you kidding me?
4 matches?
4 matches? That's literally double everybody else.
It is.
Other than it's just absurd.
It is, and we will let you rant like crazy. Let me just get through this real fast.
Sorry.
No problem, yeah. But apparently there will be an option in the future to remove the stage playoffs from your scoring system. This is one of those things we advise absolutely everybody do. This decision was a bit of a thonker, as it really just flies right in the face of competitive fairness. You don't draft your fantasy team thinking, well, these guys are on the best team. You think they're going to have the best performances. It's a very different style of game than predicting matches or anything like that goes. Obviously, fantasy is a completely separate animal. So Asmith, why don't we let you go off on your rant here a little bit? I know a lot of your matchups were impacted. There was strategy behind picking players that were on these teams that might make the playoffs, and I think we were able to steer people in a solid direction. But give us your opinions on including the stage playoffs here.
Look, I'm not going to say this is the dumbest thing ever, but I'm actually going to say this is literally the dumbest thing they've ever done. Dumbest thing they've ever done here so far. Worse than the original old scoring play system. This is so ridiculous. The team that wins is the team that has more playoff players. That's ridiculous. That should never be the case. This is not an actual game of, this is dumb luck. My team got more playoff players, so we win. Therefore, I should select every Korean player? No, that's so dumb. Why are they doing this? Do they have anybody that had any fantasy experience ever in this thing? Probably not, because they've made some seriously questionable decisions. I'm looking at you, Winston Lab, right now. Hit me up. I'm available. I have a job, but more than willing to be a consultant here. But seriously, get somebody who knows what they're doing, because right now you have no idea what you're doing with this. They're making so many messy decisions, and a competitor is going to come in next season and completely wipe y'all's fantasy thing out because y'all have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah, this is really the kind of the second thing that broke. There's been like two cardinal rules of fantasy that have been broken so far. And the one is you don't change the scoring format. That one got rectified, but it's a little nerve-wracking that the conversation had to happen, right? That we needed to get our pitchforks out a little bit. But that one at least got fixed. This one, unfortunately, all the leagues were warped because of it. The best example I can give you, sorry, Taco, I have to mention that maybe your performance last week was a little suspect,
just a little inflated.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at his matchup last week, he put up 1,747 fantasy points. The only player he had that didn't make the playoffs was Hydration. He had Libero, Prophet, Jonak, Coolmat, and Fury. And I don't even know that they're all starters on his team, but he just had to roll them out there because they were going to play so many matchups, and it worked for him. He crushed Moirai by like 700 points. It was like 600 and change points. It was particularly brutal. So yeah, it's just kind of an example. Like, listen, we knew it was going to happen. We were able to plan for it. The league's not completely ruined, but it's just like there's this 1 week out there that you just kind of like, we wish we could omit from all these, especially the two competitive expert leagues that we're doing. It just kind of taints them, right? It's nothing we could have anticipated. Our draft strategies would have been drastically different if we would have known 20 to 25% of our matches we're going to have huge weights put on the most successful overall teams, things like that. So it was unfortunate. Going forward, it looks like it will be fixed. But yeah, Winston's like, you got to find somebody. Myself, Asmith, were available. And there's a lot of fantasy players out there that could have, I think if you just run this by them when the decision was being made, I think it could have been easily avoided.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the next problem, though. Like, let's be real. Like, we've had two major issues. What's the next one they're going to do? Yeah,
and
people lose faith.
When you have two voluntary issues that didn't need to be an issue and were brought in as an issue, it kind of like brings back things that were just honest mistakes, right? Like, and it's something that really has, like, honestly, there's two leagues out there that I feel like were ruined for me because that trade bug, right? Like, it was a bug. It was nothing intentional. It wasn't a decision. It's very easy to forgive. But when you start like adding it into all the voluntary things that have been done, it just snowballs, and it just becomes harder and harder to not kind of keep that eye out on the next platform. But for the time being, they're alone. So get it fixed, and we'll hopefully you guys can keep it together. But yeah, I did see a little bit of comments too. The other things that we wanted, like they're going to be, we should expect drafting next year. It was just he needed to get up something that was functional and worked for this season, and that was kind of what we thought and expected from that. So I don't know, something to keep an eye on. It was definitely really frustrating, and like you said, it just makes me nervous. Like, I don't want to like be constantly complaining about stuff. It's not what I want to be doing, but I'm a little bit forced to because I'm really passionate about fantasy sports. I'm really passionate about Overwatch, so when I like get serious about something, and I've gotten serious about Fantasy Overwatch now, I just want it to be fair. I want it to be played on the rules that everybody expected going into it, and that's not necessarily been the case so far. Hopefully it gets better going forward.
Yeah, I'm all for getting on their bandwagon once they get everything fixed, but right now it blows my mind.
Well, and now we're done apologizing for them, and let's apologize for ourselves. We did miss an episode last week, and thank you guys for sticking with us, coming back afterwards. As you guys know, we have a chock-full schedule here of recording. We record this show on Sunday. We record our flagship show on Monday. We record Around the Payload on Tuesday. So when something comes up like the Super Bowl, where we all wanted to spend time with our friends and our family and enjoy the day, we didn't really have an opportunity to reschedule this. This is the show that will be eating the cancellations, I believe, for the time being. In the event that they're needed, we might have to someday do the flagship on a Sunday or something like that, and it may not be possible to get an episode out for this. So our apologies for that. Hopefully someday we can all leave our real jobs, and my phone is going off because I'm a terrible podcaster and I have an alarm set. But yeah, so hopefully we can, get everything squared away and find a way to do both episodes in a week. But if you are ever missing a foul play episode, it's probably because it was just out of our hands. Our apologies there. But thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for understanding. And as always, if we ever miss an episode, we are still very, very available on Discord to answer all your questions. We don't mean to leave you high and dry. Our hands were tied. But that means we have 2 weeks to talk about here, Asmith. How have you done in the last couple of weeks of Fantasy Overwatch? How are your teams looking, particularly in the expert leagues? I think we're going to focus our conversations on the 2 expert leagues.
That's fair. Forward. That's totally fair. If you look at the last 2 episodes, I've been gloating a little because I've had 2 undefeated weeks.
Good performance so far in fantasy for you.
And then the next week was undefeated yet again. So I went on a 3-streak undefeated streak with 5 leagues, but this week it had finally come to a halt. I lost 1 game, and that was in the old format. It was the battle of the both undefeated teams with Blazing Bob and myself, and I ended up losing pretty strong. Effect, I'm looking at you, bro. Had him, and it hurt. In the new format, the new experts league we did, I ended up taking Thorn out, beat him by 70 points, and it was glorious, and I beat him without Effect playing. So take that, Thorn. I'm just saying, I beat Thorn. Who did you beat this week? Because I got a feeling that it had to be another Blackwatch person, right?
I did. I beat Kyle, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say which podcast is superior between Foul Play and Blackwatch Report. I mean, I think we now know, right? I mean, there's tangible evidence that Foul Play has beaten the Blackwatch Report across the board, like on all cards, won on all cards. So it's hard to argue with that sentence there. Sorry to bring it up, Thorn, but it had to be mentioned. That'll kind of lead us into my own week and how I did here. And thank you for not outing me. It's easy to blame the Super Bowl for why we missed, but I kind of lost to you and Blevins last week in the expert leagues. So that's definitely the real reason why we canceled the show. Links are being sick. It made me lose to Blevins. It was the worst. But yeah, so looking at my week this past week, I had a good week here. It was my team, like clockwork, defeats Blackwatch Besties 1273 to 1162. So super, super close and super high scoring. And then I was able to take down Kyle from Blackwatch Report in the new scoring format, 1466 to 1161. So kind of thrashed Kyle a little bit there. But keep your chin up, bud. I'm sure things will get better for you, but maybe not, because we're going to look at these standings for each of those leagues here. Kind of give you guys an idea for how everything's breaking down. Which scoring format do you want to go through, Asmith?
I'll go over the first. Well, actually, I'm going to go over the one that we'll go over the first one.
You're in second place in both of them. So.
Yeah, second place, but we're undefeated teams. So anyways, on the old scoring format, the one we drafted before they dropped the new scoring format, was Blazing Bob's in the lead. He's at 4-0 right now. Just beat me this week, so rip. He's got 12 points. In second place, tied for second, is myself, the Grouchy Desperados. What up? Shout out to the old school teams. And I am tied with Please Play Pine, which I am only but assuming that must be the Blevins.
That's Blevins, yep.
Yeah. And then we've got Like Clockwork, which is DeathBlow's team, sitting at 2-2. You are tied with Fleta is Meta, which is
Invictus?
And yeah, I think it's Invictus.
It is? I'm looking at it now so that we can be sure what we say.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got Mad for Mickey. Abnerd, and he is at 1-3. And Blackwatch Besties is tied with him at 1-3. And
Slambo?
That is Slambo. That's what I was thinking. And then you got beat by a girl. Sorry, Mel. But you are sitting at 0-4, and I don't think it's going to get any better for you.
Yeah, I had a bit of a rough draft, Mel, but we got our eye on you. There's an acquisition period that's going to add a lot of talent to this league. It'll be an opportunity for her to improve and get better. But Obviously, as we look at the season as one quarter of the way done here, it seems like it would be a tough spot to make it into our playoffs. We are going to be doing a playoff here for this league, so the top four will be for both of these leagues. So the top four will be kind of breaking off and going through to a standard kind of playoff format that will handle off of the platform.
Did you say playoffs?
Playoffs. Yeah, I don't have the drop, so we'll just have to do it. But that's more fun, anyways. I would rather do that particular drop than play that particular drop. So, we'll just playoffs. We'll just say that one ourselves. But looking at the new scoring format league, the Taco Did It League, since he broke our draft, and then I may or may not. I'm honestly, because I'm so sure I didn't. Like, I put in my picks, I almost feel bad for him. Like, maybe he put them in the first time. I don't know. But maybe we just both forgot to hit save when we did it. Who knows? That's very, very possible as well. But nonetheless, Taco Did It's the name of that league because he screwed up first, and I get to name it. So, looking at first place here, what is happening? The Blevins is in first place, tied for it with Asmith and Taco. All three teams are at 2-0 with 6 points. I am tied for fourth place here with Moirai. We both 1-1 at 3 points. Thornrain, the Monkey Menace, who's the Monkey Prince, and Steve Wynn, yet to pick up a win here, ironically, or not Steve, but Kyle. So you guys got a little bit of work to do, get caught up here, and but thankfully that league started late enough. You guys are in a much better spot than winless teams in leagues that have been running a little bit longer. So they'll have some work to do, but not near as much. So that's kind of how things stand in our leagues right now. You guys hear us talk about a lot of these guys. You listen to our shows, so we think you guys get a lot of enjoyment from hearing about how well or not well we do in any given week. So we'll keep these up unless you guys really hate them. I hate hearing about them. So let us know, and we will kind of adjust the show from there. Now we want to take a look at the week that was, week 5 here. What we've done, to give you guys a heads up, is we talked about how we don't like that the playoffs were included, and if they're not going to be included going forward, it would be a shame to include the points scored in the playoffs in our analysis. Playoffs! So we're going to omit those points scored. Asmith did a ton of work this weekend to make sure that he captured the points, knows exactly, when, what games they got each point from. And when we talk about what their ranking was on the week, what their ranking was overall, when we're talking about the stage leaders and feeders, it's going to be omitting those 2 extra games for London and the extra game for both Houston and New York. Those won't count in the season-long totals or the weekly totals that we'll be discussing going forward. We might mention how they did with the playoffs because it was just so ridiculous looking at you, Prophet. But so that's what we've done, and always know going forward that those points aren't counting when we make analysis or opinions, because they're never going to count again. So
sure, I for one, I'm just going to pretend they never happened. That's just me. Yeah,
that's really the only way we can analyze them. We can look at them as an eyeball test and judge how we think the players did and make analysis from those games. But as far as counting the points, it's just not fair. So we're not going to do it. But looking at last week, we're going to start over in the tank department with leaders at tank. Asmith, talk to us about the first one here.
The first one I've got here is Manitin. Manitin tore it up. He put up 190 points on the week. The most of those points were in the second game. He put up 131 in his second game. He only put up 59 in his first. But that was good enough to put him at the number 7th overall tank this week, which is a large step up from where he normally is. I'm expecting good things for Manitin, pending he doesn't get benched next season. So Manitin did really, really well. Stepped up big time this week. Hopefully we get to see him continue to step up, because he was one of the highlights of that Florida roster.
Yeah, and Florida had that match that was in between, like the playoffs started. They started in the middle of the regular scheduled games, right? The Houston versus Boston was in for all intents and purposes a playoff match, right? And then there was just this one layover match in between when the actual playoffs started. Mm-hmm. It was really hard to focus and really hard to pay attention to that as a fan of a team that just got into the playoffs, and you were hyped and ready for that, and then you're like, oh, I've got to watch Philly crush Florida now. And it didn't really play out that way. Florida played really well. They showed probably their best match of the stage, did really, really well. And Manitin, had a really good performance in that match. Like you said, 190 points. I don't know if we used him as a sleeper last week because we're kind of resetting that whole game anyways, since we don't have to do sleepers this week. But if any of us did, it was a great call. He's somebody that you can definitely use, especially as I think we all expect Florida to improve, right? They're not likely to get worse from where they're at right now, maybe in the standings, but not in play. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have too many worries about Manitin going forward. I think
he's
Zappos
put himself at the number 9 overall tank right now. Scoring.
Yeah, he's been a surprise, and really the one on the team. Like we expected, Tavik especially, most notably, to be somebody that it didn't matter if the team did poorly. We assumed he would do well, and really it's kind of been Manitin that's been in that spot. So shout outs to him. He is the number 1 tank leader of the week. I'm going to take the next one here because it's Coco. Apparently you get fantasy points for just charging as Reinhardt directly off the map, like just past everybody, straight off the map. But no, he had a phenomenal low light this weekend. But on the overall, Dallas had a bit of a turnaround week. I was really, really nervous for Dallas. They needed to get to 3 wins to escape this stage and have a puncher's chance at the playoffs. We don't have any numbers to fall back on, but before the season, me and Blevins kind of put that stage 1 panic button number at 3 wins. You need to be at 3 wins. Otherwise you're probably not going to make it. Dallas got there, kept themselves in the running, did it without effect this week, which I thought was very notable. To perform as well as they did this week without arguably their best player was a big boon for them. I was really, really happy. So shout outs to Asmith. Got a little bit of a reason to smile leaving the stage. It's not all negative. And Coco was a startable tank this week. He was number 9. So a big performance from him. Somebody that I think you can keep an eye on. We don't know what additions they're going to have. You don't have to protect him with your life on your lineup per se, but he's somebody that if we're moving into a Reinhardt-based meta, he's going to get better and he's going to be a point scorer. So somebody to keep an eye on. Asmith, who's the number 3 tank leader for the week?
Number 3 tank leader is going to surprise a lot of people, but I just had to put this in there because it's a momentous occasion for this guy. MG from the Shanghai Dragons put up 111 points. That's good enough for only the 18th overall spot this week in tanks, which is not really a startable spot. But it's good news because guess what? He got over 100 points for the first time all season. So everybody shout outs to MG. Woohoo! Getting over 100 points this week. Shanghai Dragons really are looking up. And he was the brightest spot, I think, for the Dragons this week. So, and he even got subbed out part of the second game. And he still managed to score that. So if he had played all maps, he probably would have put up even more respectable numbers.
Yeah, closer to like a top 15 play, maybe somebody you'd consider in one of those flex positions on the roster. You wouldn't have predicted it and actually used him, but you would have been able to get away with it this week. And notably, we don't know what additions they're going to make. There's rumors of, that Chinese 4-stack that's ruining comp for everybody, you know what I mean? And that containing, I'm blanking on her name off the top of my head. I shouldn't be. Gaguri?
Yeah, Gaguri. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I'm probably butchering it, but that's generally it. So yeah, there's rumors that Gaguri's coming in. Listen, I've been talking about how I think MG needs to be playing over Zushu 100% of the time. We don't know that MG is going to keep his role, but keep an eye on the additions. Hopefully by next week we have the contract signed and the names, and we'll know who's coming in, and we can have a better conversation about that. But I do think if MG is going to get the bulk of the playing time, he's going to be somebody worth owning in leagues at least. So keep an eye on him, and don't pay too much or don't give up anybody of any value on your roster to pick him up. But if he's on the unsigned players list and you've got a guy like, trying to think of who, I don't know, if you've been like stashing IDDQD every week he doesn't see the field, it just becomes more likely that he's not going to. So that's somebody you might be able to drop. But looking forward here, we've got 2 supports we want to talk about in the leaders section. Hey Smith, why don't you lead us off here? Talk to us about your boy finally returning some of that draft value that we thought he had at the beginning of the stage.
Thank the Lord, my boy Harry Hook has come off and set it afire this week. He put up 290 points. 290 points in 2 games. That's crazy. That gave him the 2nd overall spot. And he's finally healthy. Praise the Lord. Because they need a little bit of healthy stability in their lives right now. And overall, he's one of the bright spots. Definitely not the only one, obviously, because we had Coco, and I think we're gonna have another Dallas Fuel player in the DPS. Hint, hint. But Dallas Fuel players are starting to look up. He put up 184 points in that first game, which is more than most players put up. Yeah, 184 points would put him in the top 15 for one game. For top 15 overall. So he did set it on fire this week. Expecting good things out of him. We'll see what happens with the meta change. So good luck.
Yeah, and the other leader this week, you mentioned the number 2 scoring support. I'm going to mention the number 1 scoring support. It was Neko from the Boston Uprising. Listen, if you're not buying into the Boston Uprising as a super viable team going forward, you're not paying attention at this point. If I'm saying that with how much I hate them, it has to just be undoubtedly true at this point. 2 very different matchups here for Boston, right? I mean, they 4-0 stomped the bad version of the Philadelphia Fusion that showed up on Thursday this week, and it wasn't particularly close. And we've talked about how that's been kind of a negative for some players. Neko, not one of them, put up 136 points in the midst of a stomp. And when you compare that to the knockdown, drag-out brawl versus Houston to decide whether it was Boston, the LA Valiant, or Houston going into the playoffs, Neko put up another very, very big performance, 162 points from that matchup. We know we love when they go long and they go to 5 and they're super competitive. We know that's good for everybody at this point. But I think it's really important to note that Neko seems to be flat and consistent despite what the matchup turns out to be. I think that really, really ups his value going forward. And when you look at how he fits into the overall grand total points for support, let's see, he's still doing, he's number 2 overall. I had the thing scroll down. I'm like, where is he? He can't be that far down. I wanted to talk about this because he had a good spot. He is behind only Jonak right now. So that's really, really impressive. He's, there's a bit of a jump between him and Jonak. You definitely want Jonak as the number 1 overall pick. I think that's right. But Neko's somebody that has to get respect and has to be a huge value here. These Boston players in particular might very well be the fantasy MVPs on the season if they can maintain this pace and this performance, just because you didn't pay much for them in the draft, because we all assumed they'd either be awful or take a long time to get to where they're at right now, and they've gotten here quickly. So they're a very big boon to their fantasy rosters for the owners that have taken them. Congratulations to the players. I won't extend that to the ownership, but nonetheless to the players, big congratulations. You guys have a phenomenal stage 1. Really, really impressive. Now let's look at the DPS leaders for the week. Asmith, your boys are all over these leaders, so hit us with the Dallas Fuel inclusion for the DPS.
My boy, Mr. Good Aim, right here, Taimu. He talked some smack going into it. Everyone was wondering, where is his head? What's going on with Taimu? He sat himself out one week. Like, is Taimu okay? He's lost his confidence. Taimu came in this week and was like, you know what? I'm feeling it. Easy clap. We're going to win. And guess what? They won both games this week, and Taimu popped off. He put up 257 overall points, best for the number 2 spot right now this week. He just tore it up. Taimu was hitting shots. He put up over 100 points both games. Put up 148 in the first game against the Dragons, which ended up going to 5. Which, I mean, regardless of whether my heart was okay or not during that game, doesn't matter, because my fantasy points were doing great. Because going to 5 is always good. And guess what? Taimu might be back. And if you bought him low, then you probably did yourself a big bonus.
Yeah, definitely might be back. And to give you an example of buying him low and getting a big bonus, 2 weeks ago when we drafted the new scoring format Expert League, I took him in round number 10. So an ultimate value pick there, somebody that I can now just plug into my lineup as a starter, because like you said, he looks like he's back. The team doesn't necessarily look like they're all the way back, but they're on the right path. And we all expect the Death of the Mercy meta to provide them a boost. And I think the map pool probably was a little unkind to them this time around, something that we didn't really talk about too much because we don't have anything to compare it to, right? We don't have other map history to look at and say these ones are super bad. But I think there's a decent chance that impacted them as well. And we're getting to some much more basic old school maps that they're bound to be much more comfortable on in the next stage. I'm looking at you, Kings Row and Hollywood in particular. Those are like staples of competitive Overwatch play throughout the duration of Envious Dominance and really might help them get back on track. So it's going to be a little weird because AKM's coming in. That's not been officially announced and signed, but AKM is like in the locker room taking pictures with the team, wearing the gear. It's as locked and loaded as it could possibly be without the contract signing news. So it's going to be a little tough. I think even tougher now that, like, I don't know, other than Effect not being there this week, it's going to be a little tougher to see how they all fit in. They might all lose a little playing time to each other. But as far as what I'm going to do with Taimu in the first week of stage 2, I'm going to fire him up and I'm going to play him. And I think you absolutely have to. So big week for him.
His shot calling too is super important. And that's one thing they've said. They said in there, they had a video about the last week and they said Taimu not in really hurt their shot calling. He is one of their best shot callers. So I don't expect them to sit him.
Yeah, I mean, they've said, too, that they're moving to, like, a free-flowing shot-calling system, but at least, especially while you make that transition, it's really hard to bring out the guy that's usually the staple of it, because when a free-flowing system will fall off, right, when the team gets a little tilted, and it happens to everybody, even if tilt's not a problem for you, you still get tilted on occasion, right? So people tend to quiet down when that happens. So you need the guy that's used to doing it, even in those circumstances, to be there to be the anchor for it. So at least while they're getting used to it, you'd have to think it would be very difficult to bring him out. The next DPS leader of the week is Prophet, and listen, he had 451 points scored if you include the playoffs, but he also had 215 points if you don't. So his best performances were earlier on in the week in the games that were part of the stage and not exhibition matchups just for money. He was number 5 on the week, excluding the playoffs. No, I think number 1 clearly if you include them. Maybe the only one that could compete with him is Birdring, who was also there a ton. But just a huge week from Prophet. Not much Rascal subbing in this week. I think they even slowed down. Oh my God, who's the fair? I'm blanking on the name.
Agopin? No. Hureg.
Hureg, yeah.
Didn't play at all.
Yeah, it didn't come in really at all.
Played one map.
Yeah, maybe one map was what I was thinking too. Man, I get Hureg and Huyal confused so much, it's ridiculous.
Agopin, they're all.
It's like Mono, Meko, everybody, all of them.
Meko, yeah.
Super confusing, but we're getting used to it here, anyways. And Asmith, talk to us about the last DPS leader for week 5.
Look, a surprise leader here. Some people drafted him early because of preseason. And then he kind of stopped playing for a little bit because everyone thought Munchkin was going to be the guy. But now it looks like Bunny is the guy. He put up 209 points. That's good enough for 7th overall. He was very consistent in both games, putting up close to 100 points. He put just under 100 and then put just over 100 the second game. So really consistent player there. I really like Bunny overall as a player. I think he's probably going to be their starter tracer. He just has looked better than Munchkin several, over the time, but who knows? Right now, this Soul team looks very disheveled, and I venture to say they're going to go through some more changes before we figure out what's truly going to happen with them.
Yeah, a truly impressive performance from Bunny, especially when you consider there is a Soul Dynasty player in every section of the feeders list that we're about to be talking about. So somebody that kind of stood out on the team and was a really valuable asset for them in what was a rough week. It's going to be interesting. This is probably more of a conversation for the flagship show, but what are their problems in Soul right now? Because it certainly looked like more than we're forced to put Toby on on Mercy, which obviously hurts him. Like, he's an absolutely ridiculous Lucio and really kind of an underwhelming Mercy player. But I mean, they were like stacking support ultimates. They just have looked like a bit of a mess right now. They look like they can't make up their mind about what they think their best grouping of players is. And so far, it looks like their coaches think that under any circumstance, it's okay to take Fleta out, or it's okay to take Ryu Jae Hung out. These are two players that should never be benched under any circumstances unless you think you're just going to automatically win and you're trying to give them a rest day. I don't think there's a tactical reason to remove either player. I think it's nerve-wracking to me that we saw Jaehong make some just really questionable alt usage decisions in this week. And so it's going to be a little brutal. Like you said, I expect more shakeups to happen in Seoul. But like, you basically hit this analysis on the head as far as I'm concerned, because it looked like Fleta and Bunny were the best 2 DPS players by a country mile from the preseason. That's the way I expected it to play out. Munchkin was a surprise who's disappointed, and now it looks like Bunny's stepping in. Hopefully they keep that, because I do think that's going to be a good recipe for them going forward. But we'll have to see. And let's move on to talk about the feeders, since we're covering too much of the Seoul Dynasty now, and we've got plenty to talk about as far as they go in this list. So yeah, let's start us off at the tank here. Asmith, who's the number 1 tank feeder of the week? And be nice to me here, because this one hurts my heart a little bit. I own him everywhere.
The guy who you were preaching to be the savior of your fantasy team, the MVP, Mecha feeding this week, and 114 points. That's just he had been so good and so consistent for so long. Every week he was putting up over 200 points, and then he puts up 114. He kind of wet the bed there. He gave him enough for 17th overall tank. That's a bench tank. That's a player that you stick on your bench and you don't play if they're going to be the 17th overall tank. It's rough, but hopefully he turns it around. We'll see what happens. We saw a lot of Jonak on Hog instead of Meko on Hog, and so I think that had to account for a lot of the point differential there. So maybe we'll see Meko back on Hog, and his points will raise. It just looks like a slow week for him. I think he'll bounce back.
Yeah, I have no long-term concerns whatsoever. He's still number 4 overall for the season as far as tanks go. And listen, when we say for the season, to clarify, that never includes week 1, because we don't have new scoring format numbers from week 1. So just to we'll probably clarify that again 3 or 4 more times throughout the next couple of episodes, and then it'll hopefully just be baked in, and it won't matter as much as the sample size gets big. Missing 1 week won't be a big deal. But Meko's been consistently over 200 points, so for this week to be almost half of his kind of expected point total was brutal. The playoff matchup did kind of push him right into being just fine, and made it so it was like invisible this week, but it's worth noting he had this down week. You have to keep it in mind. But like you said, there was some stylistic differences from New York that we saw this week, and I think they impacted things quite a bit, so we'll have to wait and see what the meta looks like and what heroes he's rocking going forward. But I do think he's just hands down the best tank player on the New York Excelsior, and he's going to do just fine going forward. But got to make note of the rough weeks. And Zunba, listen, we're not going to go too crazy deep into analysis on the Seoul guys. It was a rough week. They're spiraling a little bit out of control, but I do think that getting their supports back on their comfort picks will be a big deal for them. Zunba only put up 105 points this week. That was number 21 on the week as far as tanks go. They missed the playoffs, so there was no chance of that getting helped out like Meko did by getting an extra game in there or anything like that. He was just a straight up disappointment. And listen, we don't know going forward. We're going to be talking more about him going forward later on in the episode, so I don't want to spoil that, but not a lock and load playable tank, I don't think, at the moment, until we see some changes. Anything to add there for Zumba?
No, I completely agree. I think a lot of people were expecting Seoul to make the playoffs coming into that week, so probably a lot of people started him and were sorely disappointed. So that was just my thought there.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I think people decided to use him after some of his recent performances, and then he came out and disappointed. So a little bit rough there. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. It's not like a league losing performance, but if your opponent was one of the better teams in the league, he didn't help you get that W in particular. The last one that we're going to talk about here quickly is Poco man. He had 97 points, number 23 on the week. Asmith, what are your thoughts here? Is this going to be Hot Buzz? Is it going to be Poco? What's going to happen here with the Philadelphia Fusion, and how would you use Poco if you owned him? Because everybody picked him up after the first week.
Yeah, he was that hot pickup, but hey, do you have a coin here that I can flip? Because I think that's what Philly's doing to pick their tank right now. I mean, I'm just saying, right now, you have no idea if it's going to be or hot, but
I have a catch-up packet we can flip. Does that help?
Yeah, we can. I mean, go for
Heads.
it. It's going to be Poco next week. I don't know. So I'm just saying, you have no idea what's going to happen. Actually, it's going to be nobody because we have an off week, so rip. Anyways, yeah, I think you cannot start a Philadelphia off tank with confidence at all because you have no idea what's going to happen. Um, Poco did very poorly in the first game. He only put up 20 points in the thrashing they took by the
Uprising.
Boston Uprising. Yeah, and then he came back and did a little better. He put up 77 in his next game. But still, either way, Poco has not looked the same since Hotba came into play. Since they took him, put Hotba in for Poco. When Poco came back, he didn't look like the Poco crazy, ult bomb that he was before.
Yeah, and when kind of asked in his streams and stuff about why that was happening and why he wasn't getting playing time, Poco kind of owned up to it, said, I'm not playing very well right now. So that was, kind of why they were leaning on Hotba, at least straight from Poco himself. So I really don't know what to make of him going forward other than agreeing with Asmith that you cannot under any circumstances start either of them until there's some clarity about who's going to be out there. Once we know who's going to be out there, no matter how bad the point total is, there's value to be had from it. You can use them if you can expect a certain point total. There's times and places to use them, but right now we can't expect anything. So stay away. Moving on to the supports here, Asmith hit us up with the Soul Dynasty member of the feeder section.
Boy, look here, your boy, number 1 overall pick in a lot of leagues. This guy is, was suit to impressed. Jaehong, best Ana in the world, amazing Zen, and he put up 157 points. That puts him at the number 19 overall support player this week. Number 19, let that sink in. Jaehong, number 19 support overall. He had a rough week. Soul had a rough week. Soul didn't look like they knew what they were doing. Therefore, put Jaehong in a tough spot. And don't get me wrong, Jaehong's still going to be fine. He's done very well. Overall, he's still the number 6th overall or number 5 overall support. So don't freak out. But Jaehong did look rough, and that probably hurt you.
Yeah, definitely. What are you doing with Jaehong going forward here? How do you plan on using him if you own him and you've spent that first-round pick on him?
I'm keeping him.
Are you gonna use him in that first week back?
You got to. Okay. You got to. You have to. You invested all that energy in him, and he's not like, he had a bad week here, but I don't think it's overall just gonna kill him.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You have to keep him, and listen, he's still a top 5 support. So odds are, like in scoring on the season overall. So obviously you're going to have to use him, and he's going to be better than that when you factor in, at least 2 of the guys above him on the point total scorers list are Mercy players that are going to be on a different role, and I would be much more happy starting Jaehong, assuming he's going to be locked and loaded on Zen and Ana, or at worst Moira, who doesn't scare me at all for him to be playing Moira either. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see exactly what role the team is in or what place the team is in. But I think Jaehong will be just fine from a fantasy perspective going forward. I don't think anybody expects Seoul to continue to look like a team that might lose maps and whole matches to the San Francisco Shock. That's not going to really stay a thing for very long. And the second feeder on the support section is my boy Raucus this week. Really, to me, this was a fantasy points conversation. Like, he had some big moments in the games. I'm not worried about him going forward. But 148 points, number 21 on the week as far as supports go. Raucus isn't a guy I don't think anybody expects to be a top 5 support. Maybe like individual weeks he'll get up there if he has a great week, hits a lot of, gets a lot of kills, shows up in the kill feed. But he's not somebody I expect to be, a lock and load, automatic must play support player. So it doesn't bother me much when he has kind of off weeks like this because, you're not expecting and you didn't pay for a top tier support player. So no real issue going forward. Anything to add on Raucus here? The 148 points, it's worth noting, not including the playoff matchup again.
Yeah. If you started him, even with his playoff match, he still did pretty well, including the playoff match. I think, a lot of people probably have him and you kind of got stuck with him. It's not like a support you really, really wanted, but, he's a low end starting supporter, I would say.
Yeah, definitely agree there. So you can continue to use him in whatever role you've been relying on him going forward. Worth noting, though, probably less of an opportunity for him to play Bastion, right? As Junkertown leaves the meta, like he might just drop in points by virtue of playing DPS heroes less often. We'll have to see exactly what this roster looks like and what they're choosing to play. And listen, we don't know for sure. It could be Bonnie that's the Moira for this team, and if it is support, Rockets might not be playing. We honestly don't know. I don't expect that to be the case, but it's something you have to keep an eye on and weigh as a possibility. So let's take a look at the DPS feeders here. Again, this is going to wrap up the This Week feeders conversation. Then we're going to have the same conversation again on the overall stage performance of these players. So who's the first DPS feeder for week 5?
First DPS feeder is a guy I've got on one of my teams, and that is your boy, Baby Bay.
Not my boy.
He didn't. Okay. Somebody's boy, apparently half of Twitter's boy, because, everybody's got this going on. Hey, anyway. But he put up 153 points. Where did he go? Okay. That gave him 19th overall at DPS, and that was lower than Dante, his duo player there. And he just didn't look like the same Baby Bay that we had come to expect. He tends to have this weird fluctuation thing where he does really, really well and then really poorly in weeks. I'm looking at his total, and he goes 271 to 148 to 240 to 153. So who knows? Week 6, he's gonna have a good 200+ week, because that's his style right now. So he's high, low, which, I mean, has overall given him the 6th the DPS spot because of his highs. So we'll see what happens. But you have an inconsistent Baby Bay who, you probably paid a good price for him, so you got to run him out.
Hey, and I'd even argue he might not be that inconsistent. If he can reliably and with predictability go good week, bad week, good week, bad week, I don't have to understand it. It doesn't have to make any logical sense. As long as he's consistent and I can predict it, that means I can sit him every other week. So I would take it.
The moment you bank on that, though, is the moment.
Yeah. Don't take that as serious analysis out there. You just...
You're like, oh.
Yeah. Don't actually buy into that. That's just me making a joke. But at 153 points, it's safe to say he's probably not the reason you lost if you lost and you played him. Who might have been the reason that you lost because you played him, however, is number 2 on this list, Munchkin. We talked about the good week Bunny had. That's always going to come at the expense. When a bench player has a good week, that's always going to come at the expense of somebody that's considered a starter. Munchkin is that guy. Listen, I paid big for this guy after seeing the playing time roll out for Soul. I'm not cutting him. I'm not dropping him. I'm certainly not playing him either. Munchkin, 26 points, number 29 on the week as far as DPS goes. 26 points is never okay. You cannot play Munchkin until he appears to be playing with some regularity again. And even then, unless it happens like 3 weeks or almost a whole stage in a row, I'm going to feel burned by this for a good little while, and I'm going to be afraid to use him. It's just kind of the way it works in fantasy. Not a whole lot you can do. But yeah, just kind of crazy. Can't wait to see what happens with Seoul. Again, they're a team that I feel very confident. They're like Seoul and Dallas are the 2 teams that I'm like, yeah, they're definitely going to get way better as the season goes on. But like, there's a lot of room in that way better. And who knows where it's going to stop. Hopefully both of them become playoff teams, because I do think the playoffs as an overall would just be way better with both teams included. And right now they both look iffy. I would still call Seoul a playoff team, but if you go that close with San Francisco, I don't know. It just makes me think there's a little something extra going on there. We'll have to see. All right, Asmith, it's time to look at the stage as a whole here. Again, this is not including week 1. We just don't have the stats for him. And this is basically going to be the number 1, the number 2, and maybe the number 3 overall players for each position here. But I think without any exceptions, right, there's like just a third support that we listed. I think that's the only one that's not kind of a surprise to me. I think the best performers in fantasy have all been out of the woodwork, not who we thought they would be, and it's been kind of crazy to watch. So, Asmith, who is the number 1 overall point scorer among tanks for stage 1?
All right, the number 1 overall tank. Drum roll, please. Fates with 900. That was super echoey. 919 points. That puts him the number 1 overall. Fate is putting up an outstanding 27.03 points per map played. He's played 34 maps, which is not the most maps out of any tank here, but it is. I mean, he's played every LA Valiant map. So as we can see, Numlocked has not even getting scrim time. So Numlocked right now is a distant memory, and Fate is the player, and he is tearing it up. Every week he's put up shy of 1 week he's put up over 200 points. And that 1 week in week 4 he put up 175, which is still very respectable. Fate is your boy that must start tank, #1 overall tank. Fate surprised me because he played very poorly in contenders, and all of a sudden this LA Valiant tank core has become the best tank core in the league.
They've been their staple, and they're a team that surprised early on and then fell back to earth a little bit. You know, they were missing some players. They had Silk Thread with I think that he was the one that had the upper body injury, right? Or was that Unko?
It was Unko.
That was Unko. Okay, so Silk Thread was sick 1 week, and then Unko had the upper body injury, and they're all back now. I don't have many concerns going forward, but they came out of the gate like a team that would be, you know, able to like compete in that top 3 conversation, and then they fell back to like maybe top of the middle of the pack. So it's going to be curious to see where they are going forward. But like you said, the tank core for the Valiant have been their staple. They're rock steady, super consistent performers. They keep them in every matchup. Fate has been a big reason why they've been so successful, and I don't expect that to change at all. And speaking of players that I think are a big part of the reason why their teams have been super successful, Gamzu is the #2 overall. Maybe I should have taken that trade. I don't know. I hated on it so much, but thankfully you just cut the man, and I got to pick him up anyways. It worked out so good for me. But I should have taken the trade, as funny as it is to look at now. 892 points scored for Gamzu, the #2 overall tank on the stage. Listen, we've talked about ad nauseum about how they're a one-dimensional team. They can only dive and blah, 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 blah. And even I thought that the Houston matchup, right? Like I thought going into the Houston matchup, I thought Houston and Boston were close, but that in a head-to-head matchup, right? Like they were about as good a team, but like that just Houston matched up in this meta better against them. But after seeing the matchup, obviously they were very, very closely contested across the board. Probably the in a vacuum, right? The best match of Overwatch League Stage 1, I would say, was that matchup with Houston and Boston. Gamzu's tank, and the tanks in particular, Note and Gamzu play very differently in the dive. Like they have a very different style than a lot of the other dive teams go. They're very aggressive. They force different scenarios on you that you're not used to playing against, no matter how much you've played against dive. And you can't continue to overlook, you know, listen, they were not great at the beginning of the season, and you can't discount and discredit how much they've grown, right? They probably wouldn't.
San Francisco Shock.
Right. Yeah, we weren't crazy or wrong to have poorly rated them at the beginning, right? They didn't look like this. When you saw them play in the preseason against Shanghai, like it just looked like 2 bad teams bashing up against each other. And it held true for one of them, but the other one climbed out of it. And so big news for Gamzu. I mean, if you're a Gamzu owner in fantasy, you can feel very, very confident about this going forward. I don't expect the next meta to be diveless, but I do think Boston might take a slight step backwards as far as overall performance goes if they're underwhelming on the triple tank, because I do think that's going to be unavoidable on some maps. They'll be a little bit forced into the tank heavy compositions with the Moira. Not sure how well they'll do, but on the overall, Boston's going to be just fine. They're going to be a team that's competitive with everybody in every match. You're not going to be able to sleep on them. You're not going to be, you know, giving anybody a rest or anything like that. There's going to be a lot of 5-map sets, I think, for this team, and that's going to bode well for all their players in fantasy. Gamzu is a locked and loaded must-start tank going forward. So shout-outs to him and really all of the Boston Uprising team for how incredible they made the hype of Saturday. Like Saturday was an incredible day for the Overwatch League. Boston, even though they didn't make the playoffs, was a big part in that. And I think gave us a really cool look into how awesome the playoff race might be at the end of the last stage. Because they were in a position where, like, if they beat Houston, but only by 1 map, then LA made it. And if they beat them by 2 maps, then they made it. And if they lost, Houston made it. So, like, they were the linchpin of stage 1 at the end, and they were a team that everybody considered to be an afterthought in stage 1, especially. So big shout outs to Boston. Congratulations to all of their fans, and I still hate you guys, but I would rather hate a good team than hate a bad team. I don't want to be like kicking a cripple or anything while they're down.
Stop kicking Dallas. What?
No, I've been nice to Dallas today. They're on a good week. There's nothing bad to say about Dallas right now. Things should only be looking forward. Yeah, everybody's kind of got that upside right now, right? Like, okay, it's a new stage, it's a new life. Like, there's no negatives, I think, surrounding anybody right now. Everybody's either making additions to improve or, just looks to be getting better by default, but, their players are going to be 18 soon. That's really the only thing that looks up for San Francisco. So maybe that's a stage 3 conversation instead, but for the most part, everybody gets to reset, and even San Francisco won't have to play Dak on Mercy anymore, so they should be better for that. But let's take a look at the leaders on the support side of things. We do have 3 here. Let's go out of order and just do them in order of how they placed here. Asmith, who's the number 1 support point scorer on the stage?
Number 1 support scorer is, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, is Jonak from New York XL. I mean, he's basically a DPS. And he should say thanks to Arc for damage boosting him and giving him those obscene numbers. He put up a 1,185 points. 1,185 points. That's the highest overall, period. Jonak right now is the best player in fantasy, bar none. And he's putting up an absolutely astonishing number right now, 33.86 points per map. He is one of 2 people, I believe, that has over 30 points per map, and he's well over the 30 points per map number right now. He's just head and shoulders above everybody else, and he's going to play because they don't have another support on the bench to take his spot. Jonak is a must-start, must-have. If you got him, you are one lucky man or woman, because you're probably winning your league because Jonak is popping off like crazy.
Yeah, listen, if you're doing an off-platform draft like we've done twice now and you have the first overall pick, it should be Jonak. There shouldn't be any question. Like you said, I mean, I won't go so far as to say to the surprise of no one, because I did kind of still expect Jaehong to be a little bit above him in points.
Well, I mean, after like week 1.
Yeah, after
you saw him.
Right, after we saw it a little bit for sure, he's definitely been kind of the story of the team. And what I think is most telling is, and I'm going to get the context wrong a little bit, but this was Taco from Overwatch Score. He was at the playoffs this weekend, and he got to sit down with a lot of the players after their victories, things like that. And he sat down with Arc, and they were talking about, what you can do to get better as a team, and maybe what some of the other teams are doing, that why are they successful, right? And he said, because we have this one player that we devise our strategy around, and when you look at the roster, you're like, oh, say Biolby, or oh, Libero, or oh, Pine. Like, when Pine's in, it's probably Pine, but when he's not in, it's Jonak. Like, he's the one that they center around, he's the one that they support, he's the one that gets all their heals by default, right? Like, he's the one that they're basing their strategies and their compositions around. He's an integral part of the team. As Jonak goes, the New York Excelsior will go. And the only criticism you can have about New York at this stage of is their ability to close out in the big moment, to be clutch when it counts the most. And for fantasy, we don't ever have to care about that ever again, because the playoffs won't ever count again. So as far as fantasy is concerned, there's no reason to doubt this man as the number 1 overall player. And Asmith, please take the number 2 overall player, because I don't want to say any more nice things about Boston today.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I'm going to have to take that. Anyways.
Yeah, they have to be said. But
look here. Your boy, Neko, not your boy, but my boy, because I'm on the Neko train. Neko put up 998 points. He was 2 points shy of the 1K mark. 2 points. Get there, buddy. Put him number 2 overall. I think that was he's good enough for the number 3 overall player right now in the league. Neko has been consistently good. Over 200 points, and he put up just shy of 300 points this week. He put up those 2 points, man. He put up 298 points. If he had made those 2 points this week, he would have been over 300 and over 1,000. Well, rough.
Then I would have had to have said more nice things about Boston, but as it stands, I don't have to get good, Neko. Not 1K. Get in the 1K club or get off my screen. Another player who wasn't in the 1K club, but the number 3 overall support player on the stage was Neptuno. Listen, this guy, when they changed the scoring system and all of a sudden Mercy had value, we suddenly had to realize how well Neptuno was playing. And I'm going to save the conversation on him him for a little bit later because I'm going to bring him up down the line. But just know that if Mercy's around, Philly's got a good one, and he's going to be a viable inclusion here. The question is, what role does he have in the new meta? We'll talk about that going forward in the next section, but let's move along and talk about the number 1 and the number 2 DPS performers.
Take the number 1.
I will take the number 1, yeah, because I can't talk about Boston anymore. But we do have Carpe as the number 1 overall DPS player, 1,149 points. Listen, what's crazy here is that the 2 players are within okay, so in the top 4 of DPS players, there's both Philadelphia Fusion DPS and then both Boston Uprising DPS, which is just nutty bananas. That tells you which teams are using them as their true carries, right? Like we talked about, New York is leaning on Jonak, and he's the linchpin of their strategy. I think in these 2 team scenarios, especially with Carpe and Shadowburn, the DPS is the whole shebang for this team. As the DPS goes, the team goes. Maybe it's the tank's fault for not making room for them, but when the DPS perform, the Philadelphia Fusion win. So they're going to continue to feature and use Carpe to no end. Number 1 overall DPS player, one of 2 players that are over the 1,000 points and in that 1K club. So shout outs to him. He's been a beast every single week. And if I'm being perfectly honest, going into the season, I'm not sure I would have put him in my top 10.
I secretly had him in my top 10.
But it was like down there, right? Like, I mean, he wouldn't have been far off
he
of
wasn't.
it.
Yeah, he was like tight. I had him in my top 10, but barely.
Yeah. Just
because I knew how good he was, but I was the few.
Yeah, I mean, everything could have gone wrong for this guy. The circumstances, the team showing up late, and just none of it has mattered to his fantasy performance. So shout outs to Carpe, and listen, if you've got him, you can fire him up. I don't know that I would put him as my number 1 DPS player if I was drafting right now, but he would have to be top 2, top 3, right? Like it's unavoidable. The numbers do speak for themselves. So if you've got him, keep firing him up. He's a special player for fantasy, especially, but also he looks to be very crucial for the Fusion. But go ahead, take the Boston player, get it over with.
All right. I'll rip off the Band-Aid. You would think the number 2 overall player, being from Boston, you see how crazy that Boston team is. Who does everybody talk about? They talk about Dreamcasper. You know who it is? It's not Dreamcasper. It's Striker is the number 2 overall fantasy player. Put up 974 points for number 2 overall. Dreamcasper was number 4, just below him. But I will mention something that's quite interesting here is the top 4 players are all 4, they're both from Philly and Boston. And the surprising thing is they are the top 4 people who have played the most maps. They've all played 36 maps, whereas the next highest is 34 maps. So they have a couple map advantage on them, which might account to that additional point total. However, they're still putting up crazy points per map total, which Striker's at 27.06 points per map, and Carpe was over the 30 points per map. So they have earned themselves and easily earned themselves a spot as the number 1 and 2 player. Striker is a must start, period.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I can't believe I'm going to make a comparison here, but it's almost like, in a way, and bear with me here, Asmith, don't run away from me too fast. DPS players might be to Fantasy Overwatch what kickers are to fantasy football. Hear me out. Okay? When I want a kicker in fantasy football, I want a guy that plays for a good team, but not a great team. Right? Because I want him to kick field goals, not extra points. It's what helps me the best. So you want a team that's on a good offense, but maybe has a little trouble, finishing it out and scoring. So in this case, it's more like we want a team that's good and can play with anybody, but maybe has some weaknesses on the back end or something that's going to force them to lose some matches, go to 5 a little bit more often than not. And it's a loose comparison, but I think there just might be a little something to it.
I'll take it as a comparison. However, I don't think it kickers as actual people. So
fair. I can't argue with it. It's only in a small way that they compare.
Where there are no kickers.
Yes, and those are probably better leagues than leagues that have kickers.
They are.
But just in that comparison there, within like how you evaluate them, it's just so telling to me and so surprising to me that the top 4 contains the pairings from 2 teams. Like that can't be a coincidence, and it can't be a coincidence that they're teams that aren't at the top of the standings.
Well, we've been talking about Boston like crazy.
We have.
Boston has the top 2. They have the number 2 overall tank, number 2 overall support, and number 2 overall DPS, along with the number 4 overall DPS. Boston
so maybe
is fantasy gold.
Maybe all Overwatch League players are kickers. That's all. That's the only thing I can take away from it when you put it that way.
Basically,
their athletic ability is probably the closest parallel to NFL athletes. So,
right.
there's a couple of ways we can make that comparison, but obviously,
I don't know. Logix looks like a lineman.
Fair. The biggest of gooses. That's not a kicker. All right, but anyways, enough memes. We can talk a little bit about the feeders here. Listen, these are guys that we had high expectations for, right? Or at least we had some solid expectations, okay? One of them in particular is a bit of a stretch, but we'll talk about him in a second here. Why don't you take the number 1 feeder, and I'll take the one that was questionable since I put him on the list here. Let's talk about the feeder tank for the stage.
Okay. Yeah, okay. You asked me 1 year ago. I remember this conversation vividly because we were talking about doing a draft.
Mm-hmm.
The number 1 overall draft pick 1 year ago, we're at the World Cup. We're talking about it. Overwatch League gets announced. Oh my gosh, they're going to have a draft. Number 1 overall pick, Miro. Because Miro was God tier Winston, created Winston basically. And then you look at his fantasy points overall, and he's at 523 on the season, getting him for the 15th overall pick.
He's about half of Fate.
Yeah, he's literally half of a person of Fate now. He's also played 9 less maps than Fate, so Kuki's getting in, and you're really not 100% sure if Miro's even got a starting position on this team. Things are up in the air. Kuki actually hasn't played the last 2 weeks, so maybe he does, but the Seoul Dynasty has looked weak these last 2 weeks, so maybe there's some parallels. You have no idea, but Miro has not been the player that you drafted him highly. I think it really points to the competition he's got. With Kuki is a pretty good tank as well.
Very good.
And when you have high competition with multiple tanks, you have no idea who's going to get run out. And if Miro doesn't get run out, especially with the change of meta that might be upcoming, you will see some interesting stuff happening.
Week 1, stage 2, you playing Miro, yes or no?
No.
I'm with you 100%. Gotta leave him on the bench for now. I own him in a couple places. Thankfully, I was able to pick him up late in our expert league drafts for like if he turns around and gets it figured out, and I don't need to rely on him. I've still got Meko for my starting tank in those leagues. So, but yeah, it's a rough go for Miro at the moment, and I think the possible prevalence of Rectangle Man, Mr. Reinhardt, coming back into things might make it really difficult for him because he's. Kind of like you're the opposite. The opposite of Reinforce, right? Like Reinforce was an awesome Reinhardt, and then when he had to go to Winston, he dropped off a little bit. And Miro's an awesome Winston, and it's a significant drop off when you go to the Rectangle. So that might be Kuki's job. We'll have to wait and see. The one that's iffy, and I put him on here because listen, like playtime wasn't an issue, right? Like Miro had significant playtime issues and missed time for that. Swoosh was in there all the time. Like if playtime was a big factor for tanks, Swoosh should have been at least, a bottom end startable option, and it just wasn't. He had a bit of a rough go here in this stage. Only 486 points, the number 17 tank overall. Not a player that you could have played. I don't know that we expected him to be a player you could have started with confidence, but nonetheless, for a guy that had all the playing time, like it's not possible for them to have subbed him out. I would have liked to have seen better. Be in that top 15, be in that near the top 10, top 12, somewhere in that range. Just couldn't get there. And honestly, his job's in jeopardy, I think, going forward, depending on their additions. So it was fun while it lasted, Swoosh. I don't know. We're going to see a ton of you going forward.
Maybe on Genji.
Maybe. Yeah, he's played other roles in the past. He can be valuable to the team, though, and not be on the stage. And I think that might be more the route. But listen, Swoosh, if anything happens and you need a teriyaki beef jerky source to send it your way, if you're not living in the States anymore, hit me up, man. We can work out a deal. I like you. You're a good guy. I want to keep you in all the beef jerky that you could ever want for
But
the
you're kicking him
duration
out
of
of
your
the
professional
States?
career. No, I'm just saying, like, if he ends up dropped or
Oh,
something like that, or like in next season
okay.
if he's not here, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure he's hanging out in the Overwatch League, because if I'm another team, I don't think I'd go get him if they dropped him. So if they drop him, who knows?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, we'll have to see. But either way, thanks for the teriyaki beef jerky meme. No matter what happens, too funny. They just like overplayed it. I think it wasn't even like crazy that he said it. It's just like I saw it like 9 times that weekend. It was so funny. But looking at the supports here, I'll take the first one. Listen, I touted this guy as like a top 3 flex support player, right? When we were talking old scoring and it looked like you wanted nothing to do with the Mercy players, so we were just ranking the Zenyatta players, I had Boombox like number 3, I think it was 3 or 4, somewhere in that range. Really, really highly touted. This guy has been number 16 overall as far as supports go. 617 points on the season. Listen, Philadelphia as a whole has been kind of like a bright spot, right? Like a lot of people maybe overly punish them in their power ranks for not being able to field the team in the preseason, things like that. They've surprised a lot of people, but Boombox alone on that team has been like a constant disappointment. I expected more from him. I expected bigger plays. As a Zen one trick and myself, he's a player I had my eye on. Like I really, really liked him. He was part of the reason why I wanted to root for Philadelphia in a lot of ways, and just hasn't really played out. Do you think he's going to be better in the next meta? I know we're not talking about him as a player that we're expecting a big shift from, but what do you think the odds are, Asmith, that Boombox shows improvement going forward?
That's tough. I'll say this. Boombox had a very interesting peak, and it seemed like he peaked at the right time. Right during that contenders time.
Right to get into
legendary.
Overwatch League.
Yeah, like before that, I hadn't even heard of Boombox because he was on like Cyclowns, and then all of a sudden he, jumps on E United and then pops off, and you're like, oh my gosh! And then he sneaks into Overwatch League, and then he kind of.
You can almost say he was on E United, and it feels so good.
Yeah.
Got him. Got there.
Got there. Oh boy, yeah. I don't know. I think he'll come around, but I don't think he's gonna be that top tier support that you're looking at having on your fantasy team. I think it'll be serviceable for Philadelphia.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I feel confident he's going to be fine for Philly, but maybe not quite going to translate for fantasy. The one thing I will say though is all these Zen players who struggled, I'm looking at Jae Hong, who didn't, maybe didn't struggle the same way as Boombox, but didn't live up to the hype. Sleepy's another one that I thought maybe we expected might have had a bigger impact on the kill feed, if not the team's overall record. A lot of these guys might get a lot better when they get their peeling back, right? Like if it becomes Dive and it's Lucio Zen again, suddenly with a Lucio to help keep them alive, maybe they're not losing as many points for first deaths, things like that. So he's somebody I've got my eye on. There's definitely some upward trajectory possible for him, but I don't know that we can predict it. In the last support I want to talk...
Or significantly worse. Let's put that out there, because if it goes to Ana or Moira, you could see a serious dip, because they may have been a Zen one trick.
Yeah, he very well could have been, and we won't necessarily know that till we see him have to flex. Thankfully, there are some other options on Philadelphia, like if that's a major problem, but not that it'll help anybody who drafted him in fantasy. If he's suddenly not playing at all, that doesn't make your situation better, but maybe a little better for Philly. The second support here that I want to talk about, listen, the guy was put in a tough spot. He's not a Mercy player, but DeHack had a 573 points overall, number 18 as far as supports go. For my money, if I'm picking it, the worst Mercy player in the Overwatch League, hands down, that was forced to play it for his team. Not his role, not what he wants to be doing, not what he's advertised as being able to do. So I don't even know that I blame him for it, but nonetheless, it was been his name on the hero, and now he's going to get to go back to Lucio presumably, or play a different role at least other than Mercy. So hopefully that means good things for both him and his team. We'll have to wait and see, but for now, DeHack did not really. If you drafted him hoping he would be good, you've not gotten any return on that investment yet.
Yeah, and it's not even his fault. I mean, I don't blame him. He's not a Mercy player, and he came in. It's really more shame on San Francisco for not picking up a Mercy player. I'm looking at you, Adam. You should have been picked up. And San Francisco should have picked him up because their Mercy play was really weak. And I get it, Dak's a great Lucio and he's a great shot caller, but he was so poor.
Yeah, and he's going to be a phenomenal player for this team. Like, he seems like a leader, like somebody that is irreplaceable to them, and I'm really hoping that he can prove that on the kill feed and the and look like not the worst player on the team at the given time. Again, not his fault, but just it doesn't change the fact that was probably the case and that he was the worst Lucio. I think even Brad, their coach, said he was the worst Mercy player in the Overwatch League. So they're aware of it. He's probably aware of it. Hopefully we didn't hurt anybody's feelings by saying it out loud. On the DPS side of things, as far as feeders go, one of these is a surprise. Do you want the surprise player, or do you want the one that we've kind of already mentioned a little bit here, Smith? I mean, Blevins is going to be mad at whoever says it, so let's let...
I'll take it. I'll take it then.
You want Blevins to be mad at you?
Yeah, I mean, you mad at him more often than I do.
Okay, I mean, he can't stay mad at me. He's like contractually not allowed to remain mad at me at this point. But nonetheless, I like people being... Blevins being mad at other people that aren't me, so I will happily let you take it.
I'm basically Superman here. I dive in.
Just gonna jump in front of that bullet for me.
That's it.
Much appreciated. The number one feeder is Munchkin here. He had 215 points overall, number 29 as an overall DPS player. Fewer points than Pine, who like barely plays. Okay, and now Munchkin didn't play a lot, but we expected it, right? Like they showed that he was their starter for a little while. Got us to maybe trade for him or invest draft capital into him, and just in time to like gut our fantasy teams from us, as he's no longer playing anymore. So he was kind of the easy inclusion. A. Smith, talk to us about the surprise name here.
Shocking name on the list here is Sabiel.
Probably the best tracer in Overwatch League, is a feeder for stage 1.
Easily the best tracer, in my opinion.
I would agree.
He takes 1v1s like nobody's business, and he's just incredible. But the reason he put up 537 points on the season, which puts him at the 19th overall DPS, because he ended up sitting out a couple of times, completely sitting out multiple games because you had your boy Pine running it. And, you know, when he sits out, it hurts. Anytime a player is sitting out, they're not getting fantasy points. Therefore, he can't continue to play. Due to New York's flexibility, they are able to switch players around, therefore, hurting their fantasy value, but helping their overall team. This is a fantasy podcast, not a team podcast, and Sabiel has been a feeder strictly because he's not playing. But he is doing decent in the points per map. He's putting up 24.41 points per map. So he's not a complete feeder in points per map, but
less than Siegel.
Less than Siegel, but he's pretty much on par with Jake. Points per map.
Yeah, points per map. He's doing just fine, like you said. It's a large
he's just
part
not playing the maps.
Yeah, it's a large part of coming out some. And also, listen, like we said, like the team focuses their support play around Jonak, or like, they try to support Jonak, and when that leaves your tracer just off on his own to like fend for himself, there's gonna be extra deaths to that, right? They're just going to come in. So this is not a problem for the New York Excelsior. This is sheerly a problem for fantasy owners that paid a first round draft pick for the guy when he's probably not going to be able to return that value. On the overall, Sabiel is still the tracer god. He's still one of the best players in the league, but just not as good as Carpe for fantasy. I don't know what to tell you. It's just the way it is. It feels weird to say it out loud, but there it is. We've put it out there, and now we've got to live with any backlash that comes from it. Sorry, Sabiel's been feeding all stage. You just didn't know it. Looking forward here, we want to have a quick conversation. We're running a little bit long here as we take our time to step through these leaders and feeders, because we can. We don't have to submit lineups this week, so we can just look backwards and reflect on the 5 or 4 weeks that we have stats on. But we want to look forward. So now we're going to be seeing Mercy come out of the meta. We're going to see a slight nerf to Junkrat. We're going to see a rise in Moira playtime. We're going to theoretically see a rise in triple and quadruple tank compositions. We've seen a little bit of them already make it into the Overwatch League, so it's safe to say we'll see some more of it. So that begs the question here, A. Smith, and we're both going to answer it, but who do we think is going to see less playing time as a result of the meta changes going forward into stage 2?
All right, I've got a lot of hypotheticals here because we have no idea. But in theory, Jake has been a player that has played a lot, but due to the upcoming meta, which could be very tank focused, Jake hasn't shown as a good player on any tank. I haven't seen him play a tank, I think, ever. I don't know if you have. I might.
Nothing comes to mind. It's been rare, if at all.
He hasn't even played Hog, so he's not. I don't recall ever seeing him play a tank.
Yeah, I don't recall it in LG Evil, and I certainly hasn't happened at all in the Houston lineup.
Yeah, so he's you've got a guy who is an incredible Zarya in Spree. Now, you know, I'm not saying Spree's better than Coolmat on Zarya. I'm not saying he's better than Coolmat on Diva. But I am saying he's probably better than Jake on Zarya or Jake on Diva. And if you're going to run a meta that has, you're going to run a lineup with Diva Zarya, just saying, you might want to run Spree instead of Jake. It's a big hypothetical here, but it's very possible that Jake sits the bench a little more. We'll see.
Yeah, I would say don't react to that at all until you see it. Like, you still play Jake week 1, stage 2, until we see something happen. Don't expect this to happen. All these things are a bit wild speculation, right? We obviously don't have inside info, right? Think of this as like bold prediction style stuff. It's just something to try to be aware of and maybe prepare for ahead of time, but don't react to it until you see it start to come to fruition. Who's your next one? Who's going to see less playing time?
Why don't we just go back and forth? Why don't you?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah, listen, as far as teams that we know are going to be adding players go, top of that list, Florida Mayhem, definitely going to be making some changes. They've been underwhelming. We already know Zappis is coming in. We know Zappis is super, super flexible. We've seen him play Tracer. We've seen him play tanks. We've seen him play everything. I think we've seen the man play Anna a good amount, if I'm being honest. So he's played all the roles, and he's played them all very, very well. Who's been kind of underwhelming, and what hero has been really underwhelming is Tracer, and that's something we know Zappis can play. It's in his hero pool. We know they might want to be playing triple tank more often, so Zappis coming in for Logix makes a lot of sense to me. Even if he's listed as a flex and Logix is listed as a DPS, that might be something we see for a lot of teams. This is an obvious choice to me. Logix is very likely to see less playing time going forward.
Sad face.
Yeah. He's got the high noon bump. It's just one of the only players it's not working out for right now.
It worked for him, you know, when they were with Misfits.
Yeah, he used it all up in the contenders. That's fine.
Burned it up. All right, I'm gonna hit up the next one, and that is a guy who we thought was going to be the Shanghai Dragons savior in preseason. Turns out to be not quite even close, and that's Dia. Look, it's simple as this: the Dragons are running 2-hit scans. They have no projectile player right now. Rumors, not confirmed yet, are that Ado, a DPS player, Genji main from Korea, is coming over. And then you're going to have rumors also like Gaguri and Fearless, or those are the other rumors coming in. Still have no official confirmation yet from the team, and I will wait to claim any of that until then. But with all these players coming in, I think Dia's going to get squeezed out here. Dia's a great player, but Undead has just been better on the season. And if you're running a hit scan player with your meta coming, you're going to run Undead. I like Dia. I think he's a great Widow, but the rest of his play hasn't been all that great. And you don't really have room for a Widow one trick when you have Undead, who is very capable at Widow himself.
And listen, Undead won that job between him and Dia as soon as Uber became a rap god, when he was making that McCree play, and he had just that awesome, the awesome Uberism clip from the Discord channel. I've been like listening to that on replay periodically whenever I need to get hyped about Overwatch, because it was just too good. It was like a play of the game from both Undead and Uber at the exact same time. Basically locked up the role, and like you said, it really looks like they've made up their mind about what role they'll be playing, and it's unfortunate for Dia that he was like asked to flex and then is now probably going to like lose playing time as a result of being a team player, when I thought Dia was the better option for the lock and load, you know, Widowmaker role, if not the McCree. I think they could have done a better job balancing between them, but for the, you know, I have to agree with you. Dia's the most likely to lose playing time here as they add in players of the DPS core, so something to keep an eye on. If we start to see that reflected in the Shanghai playing time going forward into stage 2, you can drop Dia with a quickness in your fantasy leagues. There'll be no reason to own him. As for myself, I'm expecting, this is my team, so I don't mean it as a negative for anybody, but listen, Bonnie's been locked into that Mercy spot, okay? And if we're just going to be saying one of the guys is going to be on you know, the Moira and the Zen role, let's say that's what it shakes out to be, Moira or Zen with a Lucio, then you have to assume Raucus is going to be in that Moira Zen role, and you have to assume Boink is going to be their Lucio. In fact, I'm pretty sure we know Boink is going to be the Lucio for sure. So the most likely support player on the Houston Outlaws to lose playing time to make room for the Lucio is Bonnie. There's just doesn't seem to be any way around it. I thought Bonnie has played among the better Mercy players in the league as far as what he's been able to do for the team, if not for you know, he's had a bit of a rough last couple weeks, I'd say, to close it out. Like, he had a lot of deaths this past week, just got caught out and picked out a little bit too much. But I don't even think this is about performance issues, right? Like, he did well, he was a solid Mercy. I just think it's about hero pools, and I expect Bonnie to lose some significant playing time, and for Boink to be in probably at least as often as Bonnie was in before. So who do you got for the number 3 player that's going to see some less playing time?
Number 3-1, and I have 0. This is just a gut feeling here, but I'm going to go with Asher with LA Gladiators. Asher has been seeing increasingly less playing time, and the team looks like they want Surefour in more. Surefour is starting to become the permanent player, whereas Asher and Hydration are mixing a little bit, and Asher just has been very underwhelming. Surefour hasn't been that great himself, but for whatever reason, it looks like maybe his shot calling or his leadership on the team, maybe it looks like that's why they're playing him. I venture to say you're going to lean away from Asher. I haven't seen him play anything other than Tracer, and I think he played a couple minutes on Widow, but not much. And if you're only got Tracer in your pocket, I don't know if that's going to help you, especially with the upcoming meta that may or may not be coming. You know, you got Surefour, who is gonna be as flexible as possible, and he can cover a lot more roles than you can Asher. Sorry.
We've been seeing that play out a little bit. Asher, as good as I thought he was going into the league, as good as he showed early on, I do feel like his play has dropped off a little bit. He's been less impactful as he's come in. Maybe it's about subbing in and being a part-time player. Maybe he just can't get his legs underneath him, get any rhythm going. I don't know. But for the time being, I completely agree. He's, you know, it's weird to say you might see less playing time when he's on a shallow 7-man roster already, but we're already seeing it, so it very well could drop to almost 0 for Asher going into stage 2, especially if they add some people. My third player here for this conversation is a very similar conversation to banning out, Boink in. This is, it's less confident though, right? Like, I'm less sure this is going to happen, but I think there's a really good chance that the best Lucio player on the Philadelphia Fusion is Joe Meister. The competition here is Neptuno, and right now it's been like Neptuno or Dayfly for Mercy. But that conversation's not the same, right? Like, Dayfly, I believe, is an Ana player, not a Lucio player. So this is a competition between Neptuno and Joe Meister now. Who's going to be the better Lucio on the team? We know Joe Meister's been a shot caller and a very good shot caller in the past on teams that he's played on. I wonder if that's something that might help bring some consistency to the Philadelphia Fusion roster, to have a set-in-stone shot caller for the team. I don't know how they're handling it now. I know there just seems to be times when certain people, and listen, Fraggy, you're always going to be somebody that's at times too aggressive because that's just your play style.
No way.
But you do need kind of a firm shot calling presence to like rein that player in, right? And to make sure he knows and give him as much information as possible for when's the right time to be diving in. So I think there's a good chance Joe Meister ends up coming in and taking over the Lucio spot for Neptuno, which could be a big shakeup to the fantasy scene, because when we look at the position that Neptuno's in, he is the number 3 overall support player. So that would be a huge impact for fantasy. If you're counting on Neptuno, you need to have some depth at the support position. Be prepared for it now. Use your week off to find that player. Don't sit around and wait for it, because you never know who's going to pick him up, when it might be too late. Who knows? But we're going to move things along a little bit. We've talked about who we expect to see some less playing time, but I want to ask who's going to benefit the most. This is different than who's going to be playing the most, like gaining playing time. Who do we expect to benefit the most from the new heroes that they may be playing in the new meta? And I'm just going to save us all some time and list Toby, Dak, Chips, Zupasai, which is Zupe and Zebosai combined into one super uber player because they've been splitting mercy time, and also Five King. These are players that we all, Boink as well, are all players that we know are going to have a home now as we go back into a presumed Lucio meta. They're not going to have to play mercy anymore, which we know they don't like to do. They don't do great. They're all going to get significantly better as they kind of return to their home for their teams in their hero pools. So those guys aside, Asmith will alternate again here. Who do you expect to benefit from the new meta going forward?
All right, here's a name that is going to be interesting. I really like Kalios. I know he has been a very good Zarya player, and with Zarya coming in the meta potentially, I think Kalios could be a good fit. I know Note's been playing very well, and this is no discount on Note and his Zarya play, but I think Note's the better diva, and I think Kalios is the better Zarya. It's going to be really close, but I venture to say the patch will help Kalios more than it will help Note.
Yeah, Kalios was a known quantity coming in to join this team. We weren't sure how he would fit in, but Note was an unknown quantity coming in. He was like from a little deep into the tier 2 scene, and we weren't really expecting him to be here. He's been a huge surprise, but until we see him work as a Zarya in a tank heavy meta, if it looks like we're headed that way, I think it's a good call to at least be aware of it. I know I have at least one team that would be drastically ruined if Note lost his job. So I hope you're wrong, but I can't poke holes in it until I see it happen and I see Note play the Zarya myself. In the same vein, listen, we saw it. He broke my Outlaw's heart in map 5 when they went to Control Center against Houston. Zunba is a ridiculous Zarya player. Probably the best Zarya player in Overwatch League. We'll know more of that when we see more Zarya play. But I think any opportunity for him to flex onto that hero more could be huge for both his fantasy numbers, for the outcome of the particular match for the Seoul Dynasty. I think if there's any excuse to play Zarya, Seoul will jump at the opportunity, use Zunba to do it, and it will be big for them. So I think Zunba is a player that should increase in value going forward. If for no other reason, then his support players will be more comfortable and able to help him and keep him alive as they transition to the new meta. So even if he's staying on Diva 100% of the time, I think he's going to get a little bit better anyways. Who do you got number 2?
I actually have one thing to say about the upcoming Zarya patch. Could really it should, if players switch from Diva to Zarya, I think it's going to help them a lot more than in just fantasy wise, because the ults aren't bugged. The ults are bugged with Diva. The ults aren't bugged with Zarya's. Therefore, Zarya's ults actually count towards points, whereas Diva's don't. And ults for tanks, I believe, are 3 points apiece, which that's a big change, because right now we see a lot of the main tanks as your top players, and then you see flex tanks below that, on average. Not, there are some, anyways, but
Meko exists is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, Meko and crazy good off tanks, but other than that, on the whole, I think it'll be good for off tanks
for sure. Who do you got number 2 here for players to benefit?
Number 2, I got my boy, the famous Reinhardt God, Fraggy. And he's famous because if he charges in, if you ever charge in, like crazy, you just say you're pulling a fraggy because that's what you're doing.
It's a lot like when we say you're on a Harblue flank, like you're pulling a Harblue, you're off on this behind
exactly.
the enemy
it's the same
team,
thing. You're
right?
Fraggy, doing
just charging right at the other rectangle. Just go get him.
Yeah. Back in beta days, it was a reinforce, but since he's retired, you got the fraggy. Here's the deal. He is known for being an aggressive tank that gets kills with his Reinhardt. As long as his team can pocket him, this is going to be a significant boost to fraggy and play. I venture to say you'll see when I called for fraggy to be one of the best tanks. I had him at the preseason as my #1 overall tank. This is more what I was thinking, less of him playing Winston, more of him playing Reinhardt, because I actually thought they were going to run Reinhardt. I was wrong, but what are you going to do? But I think this will really benefit him as long as his supports can get behind him and keep him alive, and his off tank, really just helps keep him alive, because they're going to have to do. If he's swinging his hammer and doing damage, you're going to see a lot of points for fraggy coming up.
Definitely don't agree with that at all. And in the same boat, a lot of these conversations are very similar, and we did force ourselves to pick DPS players at the end that we thought might see a little bit of an increase. But I'm going to give my 2, since they're in the same vein. Coco and iRemix are 2 guys that I think are just better Reinhardt players and are more comfortable on the hero. And listen, they're not aggressive like Fraggy, who, by the way, has probably made me PogChamp IRL more than any other Reinhardt player in the history of competitive Overwatch since beta. But iRemix is a very safe Reinhardt player. He kind of stays back, hangs with his team a little bit more. He'll be very easy to heal as opposed to Fraggy, who will be very stressful to heal. So he might not have the big high upside games of a Fraggy, but he's going to be a very consistent point scorer, I think, from tank if they can get him ensconced as a regular Reinhardt pick. Same thing goes for Coco. I mean, we've seen him be pretty bad for a couple weeks. He got a little better this week, but the man is all joking aside, a very, very strong Reinhardt, and that's what he was playing through the stretch where Envious was such a dominant team. He was just a constant Reinhardt presence there. So if they can get back to that, it's going to be a big, big deal for them. So hopefully the meta does move into a full-on Reinhardt situation for the Dallas Fuel, though they will be getting their Winston player back. I still think their best form that the Dallas Fuel could possibly put out would involve Coco over XQC, because it's just a Reinhardt meta, and that's where he belongs. So why don't you give us your kind of jokey one, and then we'll do our DPS players here.
Okay. All right, here's one I put in, because let's be real, anybody that Shanghai picks is gonna do better. So I put literally all of new players, because they're probably going to end up replacing their main support, both their tanks, and possibly a DPS, and probably a DPS. So I can only think of 2 players that are probably going to stay from that current Shanghai team into the current lineup they got. So all of the new Shanghai players, any of them, I pick them up.
All right, and moving on, I'll do the first DPS player here. The #1 guy I'm going to give is Libero. And listen, we've been talking about guys that are players, and the meta might be shifting into this heavy tank setup. So I want to look at the players on DPS who are the most flexible, that can move into a tank scenario and a tank role and not really skip a beat and still be a very active producer on the kill feed for their team. What can't Libero play? Have we seen anything that he's been bad at? I haven't. I haven't seen him play tank before, and I still feel like I can, with supreme confidence, say he would be a phenomenal Roadhog. He would be just fine on the Zarya. Like, he could probably plug, I think especially Zarya, he would be really, really good at. Just his he's a very apt projectile player. Like, he just feels very comfortable on projectile rolls, and I think that one in particular suits him very well. But I think no matter what they need as far as tank, DPS, and we've seen him play support in the preseason when they needed it, things like that. I mean, he's just a super flexible player. I think he will, if nothing else, if like all the DPS players move back a little bit because they're forced to flex into a tank role, I think he's one that won't move. Like, he won't have to give up anything to move him off role, because he's so flexible as it is right now, that he will just, whatever he moves into, he will play at a high level immediately. Who do you got on the DPS side of things?
All right, here's DPS. It kind of went your same route here. I was thinking the same way, that Tavik, the notoriously the most flexible player, in NA, or I guess he's EU, but whatever. Anyways, one of the most notoriously flexible players. I just don't think any change is going to hurt Tvik. I think any change will probably benefit him because right now his team looks super, super rough and, he's doing very poorly, but he is, make no bones about this, he is the player on this team that they are building the roster around, and they're going to do everything they can to support him. Therefore, I think in this new meta, whatever it may be, it's going to help Tvik, and I think he's going to end up getting more points because of it. Hopefully, you'll start earning that value when you drafted Tvik way too high. So, fingers crossed that you're getting that value out of him. Let's see what happens. Hopefully, they grab another couple players too to really help you out.
I like the pick because, like you said, you can't hurt him. He's barely playable now from a fantasy standpoint. Like, you don't really want to use him right now, so it's not going to get worse. And he's a player that you invested a lot of draft capital in, presumably. If you're in a league that fired at the beginning of the season before week 1, he was probably a first-round pick because his playing time was locked in. His skill's not a problem. It's just the team situation, and that can only get better. So might not work out, but he's not going to get worse than what you're currently getting out of him. So I like that pick as well. Asmith, that's going to wrap up this show, man. We went over 90 minutes, surprisingly, with our shortened time frame. I don't really know, but that's what it says here for our length of recording. So yeah, I don't really know what to say other than good job. We did it. We gave him a full episode's worth of content. We were worried it was going to be a little light, but we didn't quite get there. So for myself, for Asmith, we will say goodbye for today. Thank you all so much to everybody who stopped by and listened live. One of our better live viewer shows, I think, as far as the size of the audience goes. So really appreciate you guys stopping by. This is the first time we have like an episode buffer to say, listen, the mailbag next week needs your questions, guys. We didn't have to do it this week because there's no lineup sets, but on Discord, on Twitter, at HNP_FOWLplay. Send us your questions. We will get them in the show for next week. Hopefully Blevins will be here with us. I know he was a little busy today. I don't think it was about licking his wounds after the playoff loss. He seemed to be okay for it.
Still hungover. What are you talking about? Just kidding.
Yeah, so really appreciate everybody stopping by. That's it for stage 1. It was a blast. Can't wait to keep digging deep into this and trying to learn this fantasy game with you all. So for Asmith, for the absentee Blevins, and for myself, DeathBlow, we really appreciate it, guys, and we will see you all next week. Bye.
See ya.
Got his boots and he put on his hat. He threw the coin away that same day. It's in his past and he's not looking back. He says, finding mine now, God's my way. He's not good, but he sure ain't bad. He'll make amends for the sins that he has. He says, I'll change the world.